The movie begins with MMA fighter Mike stepping back from competitive bouts because of aging and a serious shoulder injury. Struggling with financial difficulties, he pleads with his former manager for another opportunity. Despite Mike's insistence, his manager highlights his age and recent string of losses. Driven by a financial need, Mike decides to challenge another fighter. Initially leading in the match, Mike eventually tires, allowing his opponent to emerge victorious, shattering Mike's belief in his own greatness. Now penniless and homeless, he retires from boxing, marking the conclusion of his career. In search of employment, Mike starts working on a construction site, contributing to the team evicting Castle High Hospital. His focus shifts to rebuilding life beyond the fighting arena. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Richard grapples with financial challenges while caring for his daughter Emily, who is battling leukemia. The medical expenses continue to rise, and Richard cannot afford to compensate the home caregiver for Emily. The hospital then tells him that Emily requires additional chemotherapy, with a staggering cost of $400,000, an amount Richard cannot afford as his insurance is maxed out. Feeling desperate, Richard is uncertain about how to gather the funds necessary to save Emily's life. In a federal prison, the scene shifts to Lando, a black inmate, engaging in a heated argument with Damien, another prisoner who questions him about some concealed money. The situation escalates rapidly, and the prison warden silently observes as Damien and his crew attack Lando. Turning back to Mike, he is seen deep in contemplation, pondering his significant decline from a renowned MMA fighter to a construction worker with a modest income. His boss, noticing Mike's lack of focus, reprimands him sharply, emphasizing the urgency of completing their work before Castle High's demolition. Simultaneously, the city's mayor is making a public announcement to the media. He declares that Castle High Hospital will be forcefully emptied within 2 days to make room for a new sports complex, providing very little time for anyone to react. In prison, Lando is stunned to hear about the sudden eviction of Castle High Hospital. He swiftly requests a meeting with the chief warden, who turns out to be Richard. Without hesitation, Lando makes a bold proposal. He suggests giving Richard money in exchange for being transferred to a different prison block in the south. This money could be the solution to Richard's urgent need to pay for Emily's medical care. However, when Lando brings up Emily's critical health condition, Richard becomes incredibly angry and, in a moment of frustration, strikes Lando. The following day, Richard clandestinely meets with Lando, urgently inquiring about the money he mentioned. Lando discloses that he once stole $3 million from Damien, and this money is concealed in Castle High Hospital, which is on the verge of being demolished. Lando emphasizes that he doesn't want the money for himself. His intention is to assist Richard in obtaining the funds for his daughter's treatment. He simply seeks Richard's aid in moving to the South Block to evade constant assaults from Damien and his gang. After contemplating it, Richard agrees to go along with Lando's scheme. Unbeknownst to them, a prison warden, covertly collaborating with Damien, learns about Richard's intention to relocate Lando to the South Block. This intel suggests that Damien and his associates won't trouble Lando any longer. Upon discovering this, Damien suspects that Lando has enlisted Richard to retrieve the concealed money, speculating that Richard urgently requires a substantial amount of cash. Damien swiftly contacts his brother, Deacon, who currently oversees Damien's drug business while he's incarcerated. During a break at the construction site, Mike initiates a friendly conversation with another worker, George. George reveals that he didn't really aspire to be a construction worker with meager pay, but circumstances left him no choice as he has a wife and 2 kids to support. Mike then shares details about his past life as an MMA fighter, but now, he's financially strained and taking on any job available to make ends meet. George is astonished to learn that Mike was once a renowned fighter, particularly since George's children are fans of Mike. With no place to stay, Mike is compelled to sleep in his car, parked near Castle High Hospital. In another part of the city, Deacon and his wife, Kat, closely monitor the hospital on the brink of demolition. They are scheming to sneak in once the construction workers finish for the day. Back at the construction site, George, while working, expresses his aspiration to move to Alaska with his family and suggests Mike might consider the idea too. While cleaning a room alone, Mike stumbles upon a bag filled with money. It turns out to be the cash Lando concealed before going to prison. As their workday concludes, George urges Mike to leave promptly. Mike keeps his discovery under wraps, takes $10 from the bag, and conceals it, intending to retrieve it after everyone else has departed. Simultaneously, Deacon is organizing his crew to break into Castle High Hospital. They await Richard, as Lando had informed him about the money's location. Deacon and his team plan to blend in as construction workers to avoid attracting attention. Meanwhile, Richard is getting ready to head to Castle High, explaining to his daughter that he has some urgent work to attend to. At that very moment, Mike, standing in line for a beer with George, recalls leaving his jacket back at the construction site and decides to go back and retrieve it. Using the $10 bill he had previously taken, he quickly returns to the site. Inside Castle High, Mike finds the money he discovered earlier right where he left it. He takes a moment to count it, thinking he's the only one aware of its existence. However, at the same time, Richard enters Castle High, and one of Deacon's crew spots him, promptly informing Deacon. Deacon and his team enter the building from the left side. Surprisingly, they encounter a construction worker tasked with monitoring the site until eviction time. Without hesitation, Kat eliminates the construction worker to avoid potential issues. Meanwhile, Richard, following Lando's guidance, ascends to the 6th floor and discovers explosives set to demolish the building in 4 hours. Deacon and his crew are simultaneously spreading out in search of Richard. At the same time, in a nearby room, Mike spots Richard. Hastily, he places the money back into the bag and starts to leave. Descending the stairs, he observes Deacon's men heading upstairs, prompting him to turn back. Richard then finds a note on the floor, indicating that someone has taken the money. In that moment, Mike accidentally kicks an iron bar, creating a loud noise. Richard hears the noise, but he's not alone. Deacon and his crew also hear it and believe it's Richard. Recognizing that others are also in pursuit of the money, Mike conceals himself, observing Richard doing the same to evade Deacon and his gang. Then, Deacon and his men shift their attention to another intruder, who happens to be George, searching for Mike since he didn't return. When Kat discovers a bag of money in George's pocket, she mistakenly believes he's the thief. Deacon and his team begin tormenting George for information, even though George is clueless about the money. Mike watches this unfold from his hiding spot, unable to intervene. As George refuses to provide any information, Deacon orders his men to eliminate him. In a blend of desperation and anger over George's death, Mike accidentally exposes himself, resulting in Deacon's gang capturing him. Feeling remorseful about George's fate, Mike decides to seek revenge. After stashing the money, Mike successfully fends off several of Deacon's men. However, he soon finds himself cornered by Kat and her crew. In a bold move, Mike breaks free and escapes through a garbage chute. But Richard, who is nearby, swiftly catches up with him. Holding a knife, Richard confronts Mike, demanding to know the money's whereabouts. Mike insists he's just a construction worker and is clueless about any money. Seizing a momentary lapse in Richard's focus, Mike launches an attack, sparking a fierce brawl between them. Their scuffle is interrupted when one of Deacon's men intervenes, aiming a gun at them. Mike and Richard quickly collaborate to disarm the gunman during a brief distraction. With more of Deacon's men approaching, they are compelled to make a hasty escape. Deacon instructs his men to block all exits from the building and attempts to negotiate with Mike, offering to spare his life in exchange for the money. However, Mike declines the offer and opts to directly confront Deacon's men. Feeling trapped, Mike takes a daring step by leaping out of a window, clutching onto thick curtains. While Deacon's crew shoots at him from below, Mike struggles to re-enter the building. Once back inside, he faces Kat, who has a gun aimed at him. At the critical moment, Richard steps in, striking Kat and causing her to crash into the window. Believing Mike is near the window, Deacon's men continue shooting, only to realize they have mistakenly hit Kat, leading to her tragic demise. Devastated by his wife's death, Deacon vows to ensure that Mike and Richard face consequences within the building. While in hiding, Richard assists Mike with an injury on his arm and once again queries him about the money. Mike sticks to his narrative, asserting he's merely a construction worker and is unaware of any money. In a face-off against the remaining members of Deacon's crew, Mike and Richard successfully eliminate all the remaining threats. In a tense moment, Mike aims a gun at Richard, suspecting him of being an undercover member of Deacon's gang. Richard vehemently denies this, explaining his involvement is solely due to his inability to afford his daughter's medical treatment. Understanding Richard's dire situation, Mike uses a walkie-talkie to summon Deacon upstairs to retrieve the money. Subsequently, Mike retrieves the hidden money and decides to share it with Richard. Despite Richard urging Mike to quickly leave the building, Mike is determined to avenge George's death by defeating Deacon and his crew. Richard warns him that Castle High is on the verge of being blown up, which could eliminate Deacon and his gang. After careful consideration, Mike abandons his revenge plan, choosing to escape with Richard instead. Concurrently, the mayor and other construction workers are preparing to demolish Castle High in just 15 minutes. Deacon and one of his remaining men pursue Mike and Richard as they attempt to exit through the building's roof. This leads to a shootout, with Mike evading Deacon's attacks. Mike instructs Richard to proceed while he confronts Deacon alone. Deacon directs his men to block the exit, trapping Richard with the money. When Mike runs out of bullets, he challenges Deacon to a hand-to-hand fight. Meanwhile, Richard overcomes Deacon's last henchman and makes his getaway in their truck. Ultimately, Mike triumphs over Deacon and secures the money. Faced with the imminent demolition of Castle High, Mike has no choice but to jump into Richard's truck. Meanwhile, Deacon, who is still alive, attempts to gather the money scattered across the roof. As they drive away, the building collapses behind them, leaving Deacon's fate uncertain. A few days later, Mike decides to use some of the money to assist George's family in coping with their loss. Recalling George's suggestion, he embarks on a new journey to Alaska. In the interim, Richard fulfills Lando's request and relocates Damien to the south block of the prison. This move aligns with Lando's exact intentions, as he intends to seek his own revenge against Damien. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell if you want to watch more videos like this. Thank you for watching and see you again soon. Take care.